Story 1. It was a bright spring day in April 2018 when a senior at Northwood High eagerly anticipated our active living class outing. The course was designed to combine fitness with fun, and we'd spent previous weeks laughing over mini-golf challenges and intense table tennis tournaments. That day, our teacher Ms. Darby surprised us with news of an all-day field trip to Lake Evergreen, a sparkling body of water tucked away behind a stand of majestic pines and accessible after a short 30-minute drive. The morning air was crisp as our bus rumbled along country lanes. I glanced out the window, imagining the tranquil lake and its sprawling park area. My best friend Ryan sat beside me, his excitement matching mine. We'd often joked about the possibility of encountering unexpected adventures on our school trips, and neither of us could have predicted what awaited us. When we arrived, Lake Evergreen immediately impressed with its blend of natural beauty and subtle mystery. The lake's calm surface mirrored fluffy clouds, while a neatly maintained dock and a small park provided a comfortable setting for our field activities. We were given the choice between kayaking on the gentle water or trying our luck at fishing near a secluded cove. I had never been an avid fisherman, but the idea of spending a few quiet hours by the water with Ryan was enticing enough. We settled on fishing, leaving the more daring kayaking adventures to others. Seated on a worn wooden bench near the water's edge, we cast our lines and exchanged playful banter. "Bet you can't catch a single fish," Ryan teased, nudging me with his elbow. I grinned, determined to prove him wrong, even if my primary goal was simply to enjoy the serenity of the lake. As the hours passed, our conversation drifted from favorite sports to plans for after graduation. The relaxed ambience of the lake and the occasional splash of water made the afternoon seem almost timeless. After an hour of quiet fishing and friendly chatter, our curiosity was suddenly piqued by a glimpse of color among the trees bordering the park. At first, it was just a flash, a vibrant turquoise that seemed out of place against the dominant greens and browns of the woodland. Intrigued, Ryan and I exchanged glances. "You see that?" he whispered, nodding toward a dense cluster of trees. Unable to resist the lure of mystery, we abandoned our fishing spots and began to walk along a narrow, winding path leading into the woods. The forest was alive with sounds, birds chirping overhead, the rustling of leaves underfoot, and the occasional distant hum of other students still enjoying the lake. Our hearts beat a little faster with each step, partly from the thrill of exploration and partly from the sudden awareness of being alone, away from the safety of the group. The trail soon led us to a clearing where the source of the vivid color became unmistakably clear. There, partially hidden by overgrown bushes and stray branches, lay a small tent fashioned from a bright turquoise tarp. The tent's edges were frayed by time, and nearby lay several faded blankets, a few unidentifiable containers, and what appeared to be a neatly stacked pile of supplies. The scene was disconcerting. This was no ordinary campsite. Someone was clearly using this spot as a temporary refuge, and the odd assortment of items hinted at a life lived on the margins. I recalled a cautionary tale from a local news segment about transient encampments and the hidden dangers they sometimes harbored. Yet, before we could fully process our thoughts, our eyes fell upon a small stash of items tucked away beneath a blanket, a collection of half-empty bottles containing alcohol, vials of mysterious pills, and even a couple of small bags with a white powder. Our adrenaline surged. "This is serious," Ryan murmured, his tone mixed with curiosity and apprehension. We debated in whispers whether to alert an adult or simply retreat to our familiar, safe grounds. Our uncertain deliberation was cut abruptly short by a noise from deeper within the woods, a series of rustling leaves and hurried footsteps that echoed ominously. We froze, hearts pounding in unison. A moment later, a gaunt, scruffy man emerged from behind a copse of trees. His eyes darted about as if searching for an intruder, and his haggard appearance was accentuated by a patchy beard and mismatched clothes. As he spotted our movement, he bellowed an expletive, and his expression twisted into one of anger and confusion. Without exchanging a word, Ryan and I broke into a sprint. The chase was immediate and chaotic. The forest seemed to close in around us as branches whipped past our faces and undergrowth snagged at our clothes. I remember the sound of my own ragged breathing and the thumping of my heart, each beat echoing my desperate need to get away. Ryan, who had been slightly ahead, was soon separated from me as we took diverging paths, both of us instinctively hoping to lose the man in the labyrinthine woods. I found myself darting through narrow gaps between trees, the underbrush clawing at my legs. Every so often I would glance back over my shoulder, catching a glimpse of the pursuer, a hunched figure who had picked up a fallen branch as an improvised weapon. The sight sent shivers down my spine, but I also clung to a silent belief that I might be faster or smarter. The forest was disorienting. Familiar landmarks had vanished, replaced by a tangled maze of foliage. The chase continued for what felt like an eternity. I ran until my lungs burned, until every step felt like a monumental effort. At one point, I stumbled near the edge of the lake, and the sight of the water provided a bittersweet sense of relief. The lake, shimmering under the afternoon sun, seemed almost to whisper promises of safety. I veered towards it, running along its smooth edge, hoping that the open space might offer a break in the relentless pursuit. Eventually, after several tense minutes, I reached a point where the sounds of pursuit faded away. I dared to slow my pace, my chest heaving, as I listened for any sign of the man. The woods were silent except for the gentle lapping of water against the shore. I crouched behind a clump of reeds, catching my breath and trying to piece together my next move. My mind raced. Was he still following me? Had I lost him for good? The uncertainty was almost as heavy as the physical exhaustion. After what seemed like a long, agonizing silence, I carefully inched back onto a narrow path I hoped would lead back to safety. The memory of that terrifying chase remained vivid. The sensation of cold fear, the adrenaline-fueled sprint, and the overwhelming relief of temporary safety all blended into one unforgettable moment. I finally found my way back to the dock where the rest of our class was waiting, and I hurriedly texted Ryan to confirm he was safe. When he arrived moments later, we exchanged a look that said more than words ever could. A mixture of relief, lingering terror, and a newfound respect for the unpredictability of life. That day, Lake Evergreen was no longer just a destination for a field trip. It had transformed into a stage for an ordeal that would haunt our memories for years to come. In the aftermath, I often found myself reflecting on the fragility of our sense of security and the unexpected dangers that could be hidden behind even the most serene landscapes. The vivid images of the turquoise tarp, the hidden supplies, and the relentless chase would resurface in quiet moments, a reminder that sometimes adventure comes with a side of fear. Story 2. The Mystery at Briarwood Manor. I was barely 8 years old when my third-grade history class visited Briarwood Manor, a grand old mansion located in the heart of Crestfield, a bustling city steeped in history and mystery. The manor itself was a sprawling estate dating back over 2 centuries, its elegant stone facade and towering chimneys hinting at a bygone era of aristocratic refinement. We were one of a small group of about 15 eager students, each buzzing with the anticipation of exploring a world that felt both magical and slightly intimidating. Our day began with a guided tour led by a well-dressed docent who recounted the storied past of Briarwood Manor. As we meandered through the grand entry hall adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, I felt as if I had stepped into a living history book. The mansion boasted 2 full stories, a deep, mysterious basement, and an expansive attic that seemed to promise hidden secrets in every shadow. Rooms for every purpose, an extensive library filled with dusty tomes, a series of cozy living rooms with faded velvet drapes, and a kitchen that smelled faintly of herbs and old wood smoke, stirred my imagination. After the formal tour concluded, our teacher granted us some free time to explore on our own. I was captivated by every intricate detail of the manor and decided to venture upstairs. Slipping away from the group, I ascended the creaking staircase, each step echoing softly through the hushed corridors. The upper floor was dimly lit, the soft glow of afternoon sunlight filtering through tall, narrow windows. Antique paintings lined the walls, their subjects' eyes seeming to follow my every move. I found myself drawn to one particular corridor at the end of the hall, where the walls were adorned with faded wallpaper that hinted at patterns once considered elegant. I hesitated momentarily, a blend of excitement and a strange, unplaceable unease stirring inside me. As I reached a modest room at the end of the hall, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was modest compared to the grand halls downstairs. However, it possessed a charm all its own. A large window overlooked a quiet garden, and a heavy, ornate closet stood in one corner. Curiosity pushed me further. I approached the window to absorb the view of Crestfield's busy streets, imagining the lives of those bustling outside. The faint murmur of the city below contrasted sharply with the silent, almost reverent air within the room. As I admired the landscape, I suddenly heard a soft rustle coming from the antique closet. I paused, a chill creeping up my spine. The closet was an imposing relic of a time when every piece of furniture carried a story. I slowly reached out, my small hand trembling as it touched the cold, carved wood of the door. Before I could fully investigate, I was startled by the creak of the door opening, not by my own hand but from within. I spun around and, to my horror, saw a tall, shadowy figure standing in the doorway. The man wore a dark jacket and gray trousers, and his face, partially hidden by the dim light, bore an unnerving smile. In that split second, time seemed to slow. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as his silent gaze locked onto mine. The smile was not one of warmth, but rather of something cold and calculating, as if he were aware of secrets too heavy for a child to bear. Frozen in place, I barely registered the sound of my own stifled gasp. The figure did not move closer. He simply stood there, silently observing, as though he were a ghost from another era. With every passing second, the room seemed to shrink, the silence becoming a tangible weight pressing down on me. Panic finally took hold, and I turned on my heel, bolting from the room and racing back down the corridor. My small footsteps echoed in a chaotic rhythm as I hurried back to join my classmates in the grand entry hall, where the warmth and light of the main area made me feel safe again. Back among my peers, I couldn't shake the image of that mysterious man. The rest of the tour blurred into an anxious haze as I wondered who he was and why he had been there. Over the following days, I found myself glancing at old family photos and reading snippets from our history textbooks, trying to decipher clues about Briarwood Manor's storied past. Had he been a former resident, a ghost from a time of secrets and scandals? The question haunted me, turning what was meant to be a joyful field trip into an enigmatic mystery that filled my dreams with whispered voices and shadowy corridors. In the quiet evenings that followed, while I lay in bed with a nightlight casting dancing shadows on the walls, I would recall the sharp contrast between the historical wonder of the mansion and the eerie presence that had nearly frightened me out of my skin. That single moment in that upstairs room marked the beginning of a lifelong fascination with history. Not just the grand narratives of kings and battles, but the hidden, almost forgotten tales that lurk in the margins of our memories. I often wondered if Briarwood Manor still held secrets in its silent halls, waiting for another curious soul to uncover them. Story 3. The rocky field trip turned nightmare. In the crisp autumn of 2019, as a freshman at Crestmont University, I signed up for an extra-credit geology field trip that promised to merge classroom theory with the rugged beauty of nature. Our destination was Stone Ridge Park, a sprawling expanse known for its intriguing rock formations, weathered boulders, and ancient strata that told silent tales of millennia past. The day was cool and overcast, a perfect backdrop for an adventure that would soon turn unexpectedly dark. Our professor, Dr. Emerson, a rugged outdoorsman with a deep passion for the Earth's secrets, gathered us near the parking area. With a weathered map in hand and a checklist printed on paper that smelled faintly of cedar, he outlined the day's task: to explore the park, identify various rock types, and record their characteristics. I partnered with my friend Mark, a quiet but observant fellow who shared my enthusiasm for unraveling nature's mysteries. We set off along a narrow trail that wound its way through dense groves and over rocky clearings, our conversation a mix of scientific speculation and light-hearted banter. The park was vast and disorienting. Sunlight filtered through the canopy of autumn leaves, creating intricate patterns of light and shadow that danced across the forest floor. We paused frequently, examining clusters of oddly shaped stones, feeling the rough textures with our fingertips, and comparing our observations with Dr. Emerson's notes. The entire experience felt like stepping into a living museum, where every rock had a story etched into its surface. After about an hour of leisurely exploration, we ventured a bit farther from the marked trails, enticed by a particularly impressive outcropping of granite that jutted out like a natural monument. As we reached the top of a gentle hill, the landscape opened up to reveal a breathtaking panorama of the surrounding valley. The peaceful majesty of the scene made it hard to imagine that danger could be lurking so close. Our reverie was shattered when a large, gruff man emerged seemingly out of nowhere. His weather-beaten face was framed by a scruffy beard, and his eyes held a frantic intensity as he approached us. "My friend's passed out, please help me," he cried, his voice cracking with urgency. The man explained in hurried, breathless sentences that his companion had collapsed somewhere nearby, and that his own phone was dead. The combination of panic and genuine concern in his tone compelled us to assist, even as our instincts whispered caution. Mark and I exchanged a brief, uncertain look before following him along a narrow path that veered off the main trail. The forest grew denser and more shadowed as we proceeded, the trees standing close like silent sentinels. The man's pace quickened, and soon we were picking up our speed as well. "Where exactly is he?" I managed to ask between heavy breaths, but the man only muttered vague directions and urged us to hurry. After several minutes of brisk walking, we reached a small clearing near a cluster of ancient oaks. The man pointed to a spot behind one of the trees, saying, "He's there, by the tree." We scanned the area but saw no one. The tension in the air was palpable as we hesitated, unsure whether to proceed further. Suddenly the mood shifted drastically. Without warning, several figures emerged from behind the trees. They were a group of rugged, intimidating men whose faces were set in grim determination. Their leader, the man we had followed, barked orders in a low, menacing tone. "Hand over your wallets and phones." Before we could fully process what was happening, one of the larger men shoved Mark to the ground. I instinctively tried to step forward and reason with them, but my words were drowned out by a chorus of angry shouts. In that moment, everything accelerated into chaos. Our pleas for mercy were met with hostile jeers. Realizing that any attempt to fight back would only worsen our situation, I felt a heavy mix of fear and resignation. I slowly reached into my pocket and withdrew my wallet and phone, my hands trembling as I handed them over to a rough, calloused hand. Mark did the same, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and despair. But then, a spark of survival instinct flared within me. As the group began to herd us further into the woods, I whispered to Mark, "When I say run, do it. Find any opening." Mark nodded almost imperceptibly, and I feigned a stumble over a protruding rock. Clutching my leg and groaning in apparent pain, I drew their attention for a moment longer than I might have otherwise. Their focus momentarily shifted to my supposed injury, and in that brief window, I saw Mark scramble to his feet and dart away into the dense foliage. Seizing the chance, I pushed myself up and bolted in the opposite direction. My heart pounded in my ears as I sprinted through the tangled underbrush, branches whipping past my face and thorns snagging at my clothes. Behind me, I could hear the angry shouts and heavy footsteps of the men as they resumed the chase. The forest, which had earlier seemed a benign natural haven, now became a maze of potential traps and obstacles. I dodged low-hanging branches, leaped over fallen logs, and constantly scanned for a familiar landmark. After what felt like endless moments of terror-fueled flight, I began to discern a change in the terrain. The dense forest gradually gave way to a steeper, rocky slope, the very ridge that had initially caught my attention when we began our expedition. With renewed determination, I veered toward the ridge, hoping that the open area might hinder my pursuer's progress. As I reached the crest, the sounds of the chase faded into the distance, replaced by the eerie hush of the wind rustling across exposed rock. Exhausted and trembling, I took a moment to catch my breath, my mind racing with worry for Mark and the realization of how close we had come to disaster. I paused, leaning against a large boulder, and allowed my senses to slowly recalibrate. The rocky ridge, with its panoramic view of Stone Ridge Park, provided a bittersweet sanctuary, a place where the beauty of nature mingled with the scars of a near-tragic encounter. Later, when Mark finally reappeared, his face marked with grime and fatigue, we exchanged silent, understanding glances. The ordeal had shaken us to our core, and the memory of that relentless chase would be etched into our minds forever. In the weeks that followed, we would often recount the incident with a mix of disbelief and lingering fear. The recovery of our belongings by the authorities, thanks to a tracking feature on my phone, provided some measure of justice, as 2 of the assailants were eventually apprehended. Yet the emotional aftermath, the raw fear experienced on that fateful day, was something that time would never fully erase. That autumn field trip had transformed Stone Ridge Park from a site of academic exploration into a stark reminder of how quickly life can veer from discovery into danger. It taught me the value of caution in the wild and the unexpected strength of the human spirit when faced with adversity.